We're going to continue on our series of great Bible events. We'll still be in the book of Daniel. We're going to be in the book of Daniel in the second half of chapter 6. And today's message, I've kind of titled it, What's in Your Den? You know, if you watch much television at all, you'll see Capital One has a commercial that is saying, what's in your wallet? You know, it's important what's in your wallet. But I want to talk about what's in your den. Meaning, what is giving you trouble? Daniel got put into a den. And there was something else in that den, in his den, that was giving him some trouble. Actually, the Lord took care of that trouble. But we all have dens in our lives that we get thrown into. And something's in there that might be bothering us. And we can learn from Daniel how we can go through those times in our lives when we're thrown into the den. So I'm asking the question, what's in your den? And I'm going to read starting in verse 16 of chapter 6. Then the king commanded, and they brought Daniel and cast him into the den of lions. Now the king spake and said unto Daniel, Thy God whom thou servest continually, he will deliver thee. And a stone was brought and laid upon the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet and with the signet of his lords, that the purpose might not be changed concerning Daniel. Then the king went to his palace and passed the night fasting. Neither were instruments of music brought before him, and his sleep went from him. Then the king arose very early in the morning and went in haste unto the den of lions. And when he came to the den, he cried with a lamentable voice unto Daniel. And the king spake and said to Daniel, O Daniel, servant of the living God, is thy God whom thou servest continually able to deliver thee from the lions? Then said Daniel unto the king, O king, live forever. My God hath sent his angel, and hath shut the lions' mouth, that they have not hurt me. For as much as before him innocency was found in me, and also before thee, O king, have I done no hurt. Then was the king exceeding glad for him, and commanded that they should take Daniel up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no manner of hurt was found upon him, because he believed in his God. And the king commanded, and they brought those men which had accused Daniel, and they cast them into the den of lions, them, their children, and their wives, and the lions had the mastery of them, and brake all their bones in pieces, or ever they came at the bottom of the den. Then King Darius wrote unto all people, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth, Peace be multiplied unto you. I make a decree that in every dominion of my kingdom men tremble and fear before the God of Daniel, for he is the living God, and steadfast forever, and his kingdom that which shall not be destroyed, and his dominion shall be even unto the end. He delivereth and rescueth, and he worketh signs and wonders in heaven and in earth, who hath delivered Daniel from the power of the lions. So this Daniel prospered in the reign of Darius, and in the reign of Cyrus the Persian. We see here Daniel going through one of the most trying times of his life. It's a story that almost every man, woman, and child that ever dons the door of a church knows. And there's a lot of different things we can learn from it. We can learn a lot from Daniel and his life. There's a certain professor, Dr. Madsen Surratt, who taught mathematics at Vanderbilt for many years, and each time he was about to give a test, he would get up in front of his students and he would give them an admonishment, and he would tell them, he said, today I'm going to give you two examinations, one in trigonometry and the other in honesty. He says, I hope you will pass them both, but if you must fail one, fail trigonometry. There are many good people in the world that cannot pass trigonometry, but there are no good people in the world who cannot pass the examination on honesty. Now, it doesn't take long for us to realize that there are really important tests that life is going to throw our way. Even some of the most important tests we have in life come to us long after school's out. Sitting in for an exam, TSU is sitting for exams this week. Within 2 weeks, the junior high, the high school, they'll be sitting for their exams. But those tests, in the grand scheme of things, aren't all that important. Sure, they will affect your life here on earth, but they have no bearing on your eternity. some of the most important tests we have that really affect who we are, affect our character, affect our relationship with God, they come long after school is done. And sometimes these tests are extremely painful, and they put us through a lot of struggles and trials. And sometimes they're pop tests, kind of like a pop exam in school. We weren't expecting to be tested in such a manner. You know, we're not always fully aware of them coming, and we're caught by surprise many times. And that's why Peter wrote in 1 Peter 4:12, he said, "Beloved, think it not strange concerning the fiery trials which is to try you, as though some strange thing happened unto you." And further on, referring to trials, Peter also said in 1 Peter 1:7 that the trials of your faith, being much more precious than of gold that perisheth, though it be tried with fire, might be found unto praise and honor and glory at the appearing of Jesus Christ. Now, as we read this story here about Daniel, Daniel is now serving under a new king. The last lesson we had, we saw that the Babylonians were conquered by the Persians and the Medes, and now Darius takes over. And even as the new king Darius takes over, Daniel soon found favor in Darius' eyes, just like Daniel had done so with all the kings before him. Because of Daniel's great wisdom and Daniel's great integrity, it didn't matter who came to power, they recognized those attributes in Daniel. So Daniel was probably now actually approaching probably around 90 years of age. I know every time we see the story of Daniel in the lion's den, you see a young man sitting in there in the lion's den. But actually, if you follow the history of this book of Daniel, Daniel's probably pretty old about this time in his life, by the time all these other events are taking place. And he had become King Darius' trusted friend. And because of that, Darius, he chose Daniel to be one of the 3 presidents that he had set over all the land. And as he had done that, Daniel excelled in this position like he always did, because of his close relationship with God, because of relying on God, because of turning to God for wisdom. Daniel did very well in this position. And because of that, Darius decided he wanted to make Daniel the #1 head of the whole government. Now, of course, this did not sit too well with the other presidents. It didn't sit too well with all the princes that had to report to these presidents. So they decided in their rage of jealousy, they were going to discredit Daniel. They were going to dig up some dirt about Daniel and his past that would turn the favor of the king away from him. But that plan failed miserably. Wouldn't it be nice if in our country we could say that if we tried to dig up dirt on our leaders that we'd fail miserably? But that's the way it worked in Daniel's life. They tried to dig up some bad things in his past, and they couldn't find anything. But when that failed, they decided they had to do something different. The only way they were going to trap Daniel is if they could find a way to turn his religious vigor against him. Because they knew that was the one thing you couldn't shake about Daniel, was his devotion to God. So they contrived a very devious but very ingenious plan. The officials came before the king, and they appealed to the king's pride. They said, "Who's better than you, King Darius? You're the greatest person, right? So since you're the greatest person and you're the king of all this, everything you can see, why should it be legal for anybody to go ask a petition of anybody, including any god? But why shouldn't they just come before you?" So basically they were saying, let's make it illegal for anybody to pray to anybody but you, King Darius. And of course the king in his pride sat back and said, well, that sounds like a pretty good idea. Now when they were devising this plan, they tried to get him trapped, because there was an aspect of the Median and Persian law where when the king made a decree, it was irrevocable. The king couldn't even turn around and change his mind. So they had him trapped in that. So once it was written down on paper and put the king's seal was put on it, it was said, and it was a done deal. So they got it written into law that anyone that prayed to any god other than King Darius was going to be executed by way of being thrown into the lion's den. Now we see that the king didn't realize that by issuing this decree, he was going to put his trusted friend Daniel into trouble. But yet the king let his pride get him trapped in this devious plan that these other leaders had set up. And of course, as expected, these individuals that came to the king knew very well this was going to happen. It was no surprise to them that when they came into Daniel's quarters, they found him on his knees, praying to the Almighty God. And because of that, they found him guilty. They took him in before the king, and they accused him of violating the king's decree, and they had him ordered to be thrown into the lion's den. Now, of course, this was not really what the king wanted. King Darius didn't want to see Daniel thrown into the lion's den, but they had both Daniel and Darius caught in a legal technicality. To follow the laws of the land, it had to be so. So now Daniel was facing another great test in his life. And in our study of this test, I want you to see two very important truths that are meant by God to help you through the tests that you will inevitably face in life. First thing, God's tests are often designed to confront you with the reality of our own human limitations. We have limits. God built us with limits. Humanly speaking, Daniel's situation was hopeless. There was no human way possible for him to escape from the trial he was about to face. Verse 16 tells us that he had just been thrown into the lion's den when we first started reading our story. He's just now been thrown in the lion's den. And there were three limiting factors that made it humanly impossible situation. First of all, the law of the day. When you read verse 15, it said it was the law of the Medes and the Persians. And that law, like I said, dictates that the king's decree could not be revoked. So the king couldn't even change his mind and save Daniel. Secondly, the stone referred to in verse 17. They took a large stone after they threw him in there. They put that large stone over it so he couldn't try and scamper up the side and escape. So there'd be no way for Daniel to physically escape in a human way possible. And the third thing was the placement of the royal seals. Talked about they sealed it with his signet and of the king and the signet of his lords, as it said in verse 17. And that way, as it quoted, said that the purpose might not be changed concerning Daniel. Basically, these nobles took moist clay and they sealed up the stone with this moist clay, and then they imprinted their ring. So basically, it was the royal seal, so that anybody that dared bother that seal would do so under penalty of execution themselves. So again, there was nothing humanly that looked like Daniel could escape. Every precaution was taken to make sure that from a human perspective, Daniel could not find deliverance. No one humanly could rescue him, not even the king. Daniel's close relationship with the king made no difference in this circumstance. It was too late. Because Daniel had a very close relationship with King Darius. You know, some say that when you read the story of Daniel in the lion's den, it's just as much a story about King Darius as it is a story about Daniel. But there was some kind of personal affinity between this Daniel and an unbelieving king. There was a definite strong bond there. And that bond was so strong that when King saw that Daniel was facing death, he tried his best to save him. In verse 16, we read that where the king says, Daniel, thy God whom thou servest continually, he will deliver thee. Now that's quite a statement coming from a heathen unbelieving God. A heathen unbelieving king who doesn't believe in God. That's a pretty strong statement for him to say that your God's going to deliver you. Now how did he know about this God of Daniel's that he served continually? Well, obviously, the friendship that he and Daniel had was so strong that it was the kind of bond of friendship that Daniel could share with the king his belief and share with Daniel the way he felt about God. And obviously Daniel had been talking to him, been trying to witness to this king. Because obviously the king knew something about it. He knew about Daniel's continual worship. He knew about Daniel's continual commitment to God. Obviously, he wasn't thinking about that when these other gentlemen came before him to make up this law, but he knew about it because that's the kind of friendship he had with Daniel. But even when Daniel found himself facing this crisis, his friend, a pagan king, said basically to him, he said, Daniel, don't worry about it. Your God's going to get you through this. Now, verse 18 says, again, he said, then the king went to his palace and passed the night fasting. Neither were instruments of music brought before him, and his sleep went from him. So the king was pretty upset about this. He refused to eat. He didn't want any kind of entertainment, and he just couldn't sleep all night long. You know, every one of us, or most of us, if you have any kind of experience in life behind you at all, you've had nights like this, where either because of something you were worried about or troubled about, or because someone close to you had something going on that you just had a real hard time sleeping. We know exactly what King Darius was suffering through here. Now, Daniel was a close friend of one of the most influential and powerful men in the world at this time. The very king himself, King Darius. And if anybody had power, Darius did, worldly speaking. But now even the king couldn't help Daniel. We look in verse 14. It says, then the king, when he heard these words, was sore displeased with himself, and set his heart on Daniel to deliver him. And he labored till the going down of the sun to deliver him. But there wasn't really anything he could do to save Daniel. The law had been made, the law had been passed, the decree had been made, and it had to go on as it was set forth. Now, you don't have to be in a literal lion's den or have friends tossed in a den of lions den to be confronted with the reality that sometimes we face situations that are beyond our limitations. Situations where only God can step in and do something about it. Every single one of us have faced those type of situations, and if you haven't, sometime in your life you probably will. Face a situation where it's beyond your human capacity. Some may be feeling like you're facing some personal impossibilities right now. Maybe some are on the verge of giving up. Some people may be underemployed and not making enough money. Maybe some people are having ongoing financial trouble that just keeps burdening you. Some may be having marital problems. In spite of all that you've done, things don't get better. And sometimes things in any situation sometimes seem to get worse. You know, maybe as a parent you're struggling over some decisions that your children are making, or maybe you have a recurring health problem or some sin or addiction in your life that keeps causing you trouble. Something that no matter what you do, there just seems to be no way out of this situation. No way humanly possible. No hope that you have for change. But whatever trouble you may find that's in your den, whether it's now or whether it's in the future, sooner or later you must come face to face that there are limitations to what we can do. Why do we have to come to face that, though? What should be the purpose of us admitting that we have limitations? Sometimes that seems, if you look at the popular culture nowadays, they would tell you that that's not a good thing to do. It's not good to admit that you can't accomplish anything you want to accomplish. Society wants to tell you you can do anything you put your mind to. Well, with God, anything is possible. But with man, there are limitations. Don't let anybody tell you there's not. It's actually good for us to face the fact that there are some things that are out of our control. That's the most spiritually productive place you can be, is to admit that I have limitations and I need God's help sometimes. You know, God, He brings you into these dens because He loves you. He does so because He knows that in that den is the only place you're going to come to the end of yourself, and you're going to realize that you really need Him. The only place you're really going to be able to taste the joys of truly knowing the presence of God and the power of God, and to experience that in your life. When you're out there doing everything on your own, and we just feel the pride of, I've accomplished this, then where's that close bond between you and God? But when you admit that this is out of my hands and God's taking over, it strengthens that bond you have with God. It strengthens your reliance on Him, strengthens your faith in Him. Only after one dies to themselves do they really come alive in God? So the first truth you need to know is that God's tests are often designed to confront you with the reality of your human limitations. The second thing, God's tests are designed to lead you into deeper levels of dependence on Him to deliver you. A deeper dependence on God. Verses 9 through 22, let me reread that again. 19 through 22 said, Then the king arose very early in the morning and went in haste unto the den of lions. And when he came to the den, he cried with a lamentable voice unto Daniel. And the king spake and said to Daniel, O Daniel, servant of the living God, is thy God, whom thou servest continually, able to deliver thee from the lions? Then said Daniel unto the king, O king, live forever. My God hath sent his angel, and hath shut the lions' mouths, that they have not hurt me. For as much as before him innocency was found in me, and also before thee, O king, have I done no hurt. Now you can note that Daniel and the king are actually talking one with another, while Daniel's still in the middle of the lion's den. He's still down there, lions all around him, while he's having this conversation with the king. You know, if you had been there and the king had come to you, if I had been thrown in the lion's den, here comes the king out with he's got his little rope ladder under his arm, and he wants to get me out of there, I think I'd be crawling out of there pretty darn quick before I started having a conversation with the king. But Daniel, he wasn't afraid at all. He was just sitting there in the middle of all these lions, just calmly conversing with the king. Because Daniel wasn't afraid. Daniel had seen the angel of the Lord come in and shut the lions' mouths. Now, we don't know what all happened in that den all that night. We're only told a little bit here of the story. But we are told that the lions' mouths were shut by an angel. And that means that they had originally been open. So it was a real danger there. But now, as Daniel's sitting there conversing with the king in the morning, they're laying around him just like a bunch of tame kittens. And you can almost see Daniel all that night leaning up against the wall, keeping warm with a couple of lions on each side of him, keeping him warm all through the night. And D.L. Moody actually, he said that he envisions Daniel actually using one of the lions as a pillow as he slept that night. Can you imagine sleeping among the lions in such a comfortable way? What a large animal that is. A story is told of a persecuted Christian who was once being chased by some soldiers. They were under orders to put this Christian to death. And this Christian saw a cave and he rushed in and he hid there. The soldiers arrived sometime later at the mouth of this cave and were about to go in to investigate, but they noticed a spider web across the entrance. And so they reasoned among themselves that if a spider web was in the entrance, there was no way someone had gone through. So they didn't go search the cave. Later on, as this Christian came out and he walked right through the spider web, and he realized why the soldiers hadn't come in to look for him. And he said upon that, when he realized that, he said that with God, a web is as a wall, but without God, a wall is like a spider web. You know, God protected this man simply by having a spider build a web in an entrance. God works in such mysterious ways that we can't always understand. But in the hands of God, that web might as well have been an impenetrable force field. And without God, I don't care how technologically advanced your army is, how strong your armor is, without God, you still don't stand a chance. The Lord takes great pleasure in taking the most difficult situations in life, those that may seem humanly impossible to us, and using those impossibilities as a way of increasing our faith in His unlimited abilities. He has no limitations to what He can do. In verse 23, we read, and let me read again, Then was the king exceeding glad for him, and commanded that they should take Daniel up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no manner of hurt was found upon him, because he believed in his God. I like that very last statement, the last little clause in that verse where it's because he believed in his God. You know, how powerful is that? All we have to do is believe in God. Throughout the scripture, we learn that temptations and trials of life are to be responded to, not by running from them, not by trying to escape them or avoid them, but by, and not even by trying to muster up the most strength we can. But scripture teaches us that we're to go face those by drawing near to God in faith. And that's the way we're to face our trials. Hebrews 11:33 says, who through faith subdued kingdoms, wrought righteousness, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions. 1 Peter 5:8-9 says, be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary the devil, as a roaring lion, walketh about, seeking whom he may devour, whom resist steadfast in the faith, knowing that the same afflictions are accomplished in your brethren that are in the world. And 1 John 5:4 says, for whatsoever is born of God overcometh the world. And this is the victory that overcometh the world, even our faith. Triumph over trial or temptation in your life only comes from one source, and that's an abiding faith in God. And that's how Daniel triumphed, as it said there, because he believed in his God. Daniel was able to triumph and stand strong, and that's how we can do it as well, by having faith in God. Daniel was very confident. He had that assurance. He had that God was going to deliver him one way or another out of this situation. You know, most of us, I hate to say this, but we don't really trust God like Daniel did. Too often we're terrified by the situations we find ourselves in. And our faith in God seems to be so weak. So how then do we have a faith like Daniel's? How do you gain that kind of faith? How do we face a pack of ravenous lions and still place our faith in God? Well, it's been said that God's prescription for the increase in faith is this. He says, know me better and you will trust me more. Know me better and you will trust me more. We need to get to really know God. And that is how Daniel had the faith when he was thrown in the middle of the lion's den. You know, Daniel, like I said, he was almost 90 years old. So he had spent almost 90 years of his life getting to know God. He didn't waste a moment of it. We saw earlier how Daniel set aside regular times daily to spend them with God in prayer. It says in this book of Daniel that he went 3 times a day. He would kneel facing Jerusalem and pray to Almighty God. This is a man who took time and spent time with God. Daniel had cultivated that relationship he had with God. So when the tests of life came, his faith in God was already there. He already had it. It's too late to gain a faith in God when you're faced with that trial. When that trial comes, if you don't already have a faith in God, it's not going to come in the midst of the trial. You have to already have it. The kind of faith needed for crisis must be cultivated and developed over time. As you're under the teaching of God's Word, spending time with God in prayer and reading His Word, the more you do that, the more you get to know God, the greater faith you can have. You know, Spurgeon once said, be great believers. Little faith will bring your soul to heaven, but great faith will bring heaven down into your soul. So having great faith is not just some magic, mystical thing that we read about. It's something that we cultivate, something that we nurture, something that we work towards. Show faith in the little things, and when the big things come around, it will be there. And this is how the lion's mouths were stopped, because Daniel had cultivated that close relationship. Daniel didn't know what he was going to experience in that lion's den, but he knew that God would be with him. And he put his faith and trust in God. No matter what was going to take place in that lion's den, Daniel knew God was going to be there with him. There was once a grandfather out walking with his grandson, and he looked to the little boy and he said, "How far do you think we are from home?" The boy looked up and said, "Grandpa, I don't know." So the grandfather asked him, he says, "Well, where are you?" Again, the boy said, "I don't know." Then the grandfather chuckled to him and said, "Sounds to me as if you are lost." The young boy looked up at his grandfather and said, "I can't be lost. I'm with you." And ultimately, that really is the answer to all the worries that threaten us. We are never lost. We are always safe when we put our faith and trust in God. When we look to God, and as that little boy looked to his grandfather and say, "I can never be lost, God, because I'm with you." Now, Philip Bliss, he wrote many songs and hymns, and he liked to write songs for the little children. And he wrote a song called "Dare to be a Daniel." I don't know if any of you have heard that. I've heard it before. But he, like many other Christian leaders, realized that there was a great potential of teaching our youth through spiritual songs. And the refrain from the song, "Dare to be a Daniel," goes like this. It says, "Dare to be a Daniel, dare to stand alone, dare to have a purpose firm, dare to make it known." So as we go out into this world, and as we face these trials, no matter what happens to be in your den, may God help each and every one of us dare to be a Daniel and show that kind of faith in God. Let's stand. Let's be dismissed in a word of prayer.